Damascus, 1988. In a narrow street near the Yarmouk refugee camp, a small tailor shop opens every morning at the same time. The sign is faded. The window display is modest. Inside, a man named Abu Faisal spends his days measuring sleeves, hemming trousers, and adjusting jackets for customers who pass through in a steady, unremarkable stream. He has no guards, no weapons, no political posters on the wall. Just fabric, thread, and a wooden counter worn smooth by years of work. Men who enter this shop fear many things: airstrikes, rival factions, betrayal, informants. But they never fear the tailor. They loosen their belts, remove jackets, sometimes even unclip holsters before stepping into the changing room. They stand still, they talk, and behind a simple mirror, something quietly watches. Abu Faisal was born in 1957 on the outskirts of Damascus, the son of a textile repairman, who taught him early that people relax when they think they are being served. His father fixed torn coats and frayed trousers in a crowded market, listening as customers complained about bosses, money, family, and occasionally politics. The boy learned that invisibility was a skill. By 14, he could take measurements without looking. By 18, he could tell a man's income from the condition of his cuffs. By his early 20s, he had opened his own shop near Yarmouk, a densely populated neighborhood home to tens of thousands of Palestinians living under Syrian protection. It was a practical choice. Rent was cheap, foot traffic was constant, and tailors were always needed. Weddings, funerals, meetings, uniforms. Clothes mattered. Faisal built a reputation for precision and discretion. He did not gossip. He did not ask questions. He did not express opinions. Clients trusted him because he seemed utterly ordinary, forgettable. That forgettability would later become priceless. In 1987, after the first Intifada erupted, Faisal noticed a shift in his customers. Fewer civilians, more men arriving in pairs. Men who scanned the street before entering. Men who spoke in low voices while being measured. Some wore expensive jackets despite claiming modest incomes. Some argued about routes, shipments, and deadlines. They never spoke to Faisal. They spoke as if he were furniture. He noticed patterns. Leaders stood differently. They fidgeted less. Others deferred to them without realizing it. He still said nothing. At the same time, far from Damascus, Mossad faced a growing problem. Palestinian militant leadership operating in Syria had become almost impossible to penetrate. Recruited informants were exposed. Communications were heavily monitored. Syrian counterintelligence aggressively hunted foreign intelligence networks. Traditional espionage methods were failing. Mossad planners began searching for environments commanders could not avoid, places where suspicion naturally dropped: doctors' clinics, dentists' offices, barbershops, tailors. A tailor shop offered repeat access, privacy, physical proximity, and almost zero baseline suspicion. Surveillance teams quietly mapped businesses around Yarmouk. One name kept appearing: Abu Faisal. No political affiliations, no criminal record, stable habits, low profile, more importantly, invisible. Mossad did not approach him with ideology or speeches about loyalty. Instead, they used pressure. Through fabricated financial records, operatives created the illusion that Faisal owed money to an underground gambling ring. One evening after closing, two men visited his shop. They were polite, calm. They showed him documents. They told him the debt would destroy his business unless he cooperated with small information requests. No threats of violence. No grand explanations. Just a choice between ruin and compliance. Faisal understood immediately that there was no real choice. He nodded. Recruitment succeeded. Over the following weeks, Mossad tested him with simple tasks. Remember a number sequence. Deliver a specific fabric order. Maintain normal behavior. He passed every test. What impressed his handlers most was his emotional neutrality. He showed no curiosity about why he was being asked to cooperate. No moral outrage. No enthusiasm. He treated it like an unpleasant business obligation. He was classified as a passive asset. He would not spy in the traditional sense. He would not steal documents. He would not ask questions. He would simply allow observation. In April 1988, Faisal was quietly taken to Lebanon for a single training session that lasted 6 hours. He learned how to position clients in front of a mirror so their faces were clearly visible. He learned to take measurements with millimeter consistency. He learned to memorize patterns without writing anything down. No one explained who the targets were. No one discussed Israel or Palestine. Then he was sent home. The real transformation happened inside his shop. Late one weekend, while Faisal claimed to be attending a family wedding, a Mossad technical team entered through the rear alley. They replaced the changing room mirror with a specially coated two-way mirror. Behind it sat a pinhole camera connected to a purely mechanical recording system. No electricity, no radio signals, nothing Syrian detection equipment could easily find. A pressure mat beneath the floor activated the camera only when someone stood in the correct position. Film advanced mechanically. Every 3 weeks, Faisal would replace the cassette and hide it inside hollow fabric rolls shipped to a textile supplier in Beirut, which was actually a Mossad front. When the shop reopened Monday morning, nothing looked different. Customers returned. Needles threaded. Scissors cut. Men talked. The mirror watched. Mossad did not immediately look for high-value targets. Analysts first built a baseline. Hundreds of ordinary civilians were photographed. Faces, body types, clothing quality, behavior during fittings. Slowly, patterns emerged. Then one day, a man arrived with 2 companions who waited near the door. He removed a shoulder holster before trying on a jacket. He spoke about a shipment arriving at a Syrian port. His face appeared on film. Analysts in Tel Aviv recognized him as a senior Hamas logistics operative. Mossad did not kill him. The value of Faisal's access was too great to risk by acting quickly. That decision defined the operations philosophy: patience over impulse, observation over action. Over time, more such men passed through the shop. Commanders, couriers, financiers. They came for alterations, for new suits, for routine tailoring. They never suspected that the most dangerous object in the room was not a gun, but a mirror. By the end of 1988, Mossad possessed something it had not had in Syria before: a steady, renewable stream of human intelligence from the heart of militant social infrastructure. No raids, no firefights, no visible footprint. Just a man with a tape measure, standing quietly while history moved around him. This was only the beginning. By early 1989, the flow of film from Abu Faisal's shop had become routine, almost boring in its regularity, which was precisely what Mossad wanted. Each cassette arrived hidden inside fabric shipments, processed quietly and fed into a growing archive. At first, the images meant little on their own. Men standing half-dressed, sleeves pinned, collars adjusted, faces expressionless. But intelligence work rarely depends on single photographs. Meaning emerges through repetition. Analysts began linking measurements to faces, faces to behavior, and behavior to existing fragments of intelligence gathered from elsewhere. A man who consistently arrived with 2 escorts but never paid. Another who always came alone, yet spoke with quiet authority. Another who requested expensive fabric but wore cheap shoes. Slowly, identities began to crystallize. Some matched names already sitting in Mossad files. Others remained unknown, but were flagged as high potential value based on posture, speech patterns, and how other men defer to them. Faisal never knew who was important. He never needed to. His job was simply to keep the environment unchanged. Mossad also avoided using Faisal for active collection. He was never asked to plant bugs, never asked to ask questions, never asked to steer conversations. The operation's strength was its passivity. The men revealed themselves through their own carelessness. Over time, analysts noticed something else. Certain individuals returned regularly, some every few months, some once a year. Tailoring created a natural excuse for repeated contact. Weight fluctuated. Jackets wore out. Styles changed. Each visit produced new images, new measurements, new data points. This allowed Mossad to confirm that the same person seen in Damascus one year was the same person seen later in Beirut, Amman, or Europe, even when false passports and new aliases were used. Body dimensions do not lie. Scars do not migrate. Small physical markers became anchors of certainty. By late 1989, the first indirect operational success occurred. A senior logistics figure photographed in Faisal's shop had mentioned a shipping timeline during a fitting. That detail, combined with maritime intelligence from another source, allowed Israeli naval units to intercept a weapons shipment off the Syrian coast. No arrests were publicly linked to Faisal's information. No one suspected the Tailor shop had contributed. Mossad deliberately avoided eliminations connected directly to the early identifications. The leadership feared that a sudden pattern of deaths might trigger internal Palestinian counterintelligence investigations into everyday civilian environments. Faisal's invisibility depended on nothing changing around him. In 1990, Syrian counterintelligence intensified inspections around Yarmouk following unrelated intelligence leaks. Businesses were searched without warning. Faisal's shop was inspected twice. The second time, officers spent over an hour tapping walls, checking mirrors, and opening drawers. Faisal behaved like a mildly irritated shopkeeper, annoyed at lost business, but otherwise cooperative. He offered tea. He complained about rent. He made small talk about football. The mirror passed inspection. The camera remained undiscovered. Afterward, Mossad analysts quietly upgraded Faisal's status from experimental asset to strategic asset. Operation Needle was no longer a curiosity. It was producing long-term value. Between 1991 and 1993, patterns became more sophisticated. Analysts noticed that certain commanders favored specific days and times for civilian errands. Some preferred mornings before mosques filled. Others preferred late afternoons when streets were busier and surveillance was harder. Faisal's appointment ledger, which appeared to be simple business records, became a behavioral map of militant routines. Mossad also began correlating tailoring visits with travel movements detected through foreign border monitoring. A man photographed in Damascus requesting a heavy wool suit was later detected entering Eastern Europe weeks later using a forged passport. The clothing request suddenly made sense. Climate predicted movement. Small details stacked into larger pictures. During this period, one individual emerged as particularly important. He appeared 4 times over 18 months. He never arrived with escorts. He spoke little. He paid cash. His measurements remained almost identical across visits. The camera captured a distinctive burn scar on his right forearm and a small geometric tattoo near his left shoulder. Facial recognition systems found no immediate match, but combining the physical markers with fragmented human intelligence reports from Lebanon produced a probable identification. A senior Palestinian intelligence coordinator responsible for cross-faction logistics. Mossad now possessed something extremely rare, a long-term biometric anchor for a man who otherwise lived behind layers of false identities. Planning did not begin immediately. Mossad's doctrine with Faisal's intelligence was confirmation first, action later. Analysts waited for more data. They waited for travel indicators. They waited for repeated pattern confirmation. When the man eventually traveled to Europe in 1992, Israeli teams already knew his approximate height, weight, posture, and gait. Surveillance officers in Europe were able to identify him visually within hours. He was later assassinated in a hotel lobby. No public connection was ever made to a tailor in Damascus. To Faisal, nothing changed. He continued measuring sleeves. He continued stitching cuffs. He continued pretending not to hear conversations that could get men killed. The psychological toll accumulated quietly. He once helped a young man choose fabric for a wedding suit. Months later, he saw the same man's face in a newspaper photo after an airstrike. Faisal did not react. He did not cry. He did not celebrate. He compartmentalized. That emotional flattening, Mossad psychologists would later note, was the only reason he survived mentally. By 1993, Operation Needle had contributed to multiple identifications and several successful interdictions and assassinations across different countries. None of it traced back to Faisal. The shop remained just another shop. The mirror remained just a mirror. The men who entered still feared bombs, drones, and informants. They still did not fear the tailor. And that, more than any weapon Mossad possessed, remained the operation's greatest advantage. By 1993, Operation Needle had matured into one of Mossad's most quietly productive human intelligence platforms, but longevity itself began to introduce new dangers. The longer an asset operates, the greater the chance that something unpredictable will go wrong. Not betrayal, not ideology, but simple probability. A broken device, a careless visitor, a suspicious official, or a moment of human fatigue. For Faisal, fatigue was becoming the central threat. 7 days a week, he performed the same routine. Open the shop, greet customers, measure bodies, pin sleeves, listen without listening. Every conversation carried potential consequences, yet he was never allowed to acknowledge that reality. There were no regular handler meetings inside Syria, no reassurance, no feedback. Silence was part of the design. Mossad believed that emotional distance increased survivability. Faisal existed in a strange psychological vacuum. He knew he was enabling something lethal, but he did not know who was being targeted, when, or where. This ignorance was intentional. The less he knew, the less he could reveal under pressure. Inside Mossad, analysts continued refining how Faisal's data was exploited. Early in the operation, photographs had been examined manually. By the early 1990s, computer-assisted facial recognition and morphological analysis had improved. Software compared proportions of facial features, distances between eyes, jaw curvature, and ear shape. When combined with physical measurements from tailoring data, identity confidence rose dramatically. A man could change his name, passport, haircut, and beard. He could not change the width of his shoulders or the ratio between his torso and legs. Operation Needle had effectively become a biometric collection program disguised as tailoring. Another analytical breakthrough involved social mapping. When multiple men appeared separately in Faisal's shop but were later photographed together in other locations, analysts inferred network relationships. If two individuals never arrived together but showed similar appointment rhythms and overlapping travel patterns, they were likely part of the same organizational tier. Over time, Mossad constructed layered organizational charts without ever penetrating command meetings or stealing documents. Everything emerged from civilian routine. In 1994, an unexpected event nearly collapsed the entire operation. A mild earthquake shook Damascus during the night. No major damage occurred, but hairline cracks appeared in walls and glass fixtures throughout several neighborhoods. The next morning, Faisal noticed a thin crack running across the upper edge of the changing room mirror. To an ordinary customer, it looked harmless. To Mossad engineers, it represented a nightmare. A cracked two-way mirror could refract light differently. Under certain angles, its thickness might become visible. One curious client, one suspicious militant, one flashlight held too close, and 7 years of work would end instantly. Faisal had been trained for exactly one type of emergency communication. He placed an unusual fabric order with his Beirut supplier. Chinese silk with gold threading, a combination he never used. The signal traveled through Mossad logistics channels and reached his case officer within 72 hours. Replacing the mirror openly would draw attention. Closing the shop would raise questions. Mossad chose misdirection. Faisal told regular customers he was upgrading lighting and installing a larger mirror to improve service. He hired a local glazier, paid above market rate, and had a standard mirror installed in broad daylight. For 11 days, the camera was gone. During that window, Mossad technical operatives entered Damascus disguised as Turkish carpet traders. Using keys Faisal had hidden in a predetermined location, they accessed the shop after hours and replaced the standard mirror with a new two-way mirror identical to the original. The glazier never knew his work had been undone. The shop reopened as if nothing had happened. Operation Needle survived its most serious technical failure. By mid-1994, Mossad leadership began quietly discussing end-of-life scenarios for Faisal, not because the operation had failed, but because it had succeeded too long. Asset longevity beyond 6 or 7 years in hostile environments was statistically rare. Fatigue increases mistakes. Mistakes lead to exposure. Exposure leads to interrogation. Interrogation leads to propaganda victories for adversaries. Faisal's coated fabric orders began showing subtle stress indicators. slight deviations in ordering patterns, requests for heavier materials than normal. These were interpreted as psychological strain signals built into his training. He was not asking to stop, but he was signaling weight, pressure. Mossad's doctrine treated such signals seriously. In early 1995, planners began activating dormant extraction preparations labeled Route Sienna. The plan had been designed years earlier but never tested. It required no dramatic escape, no gunfire, no border chase. Faisal would simply leave Syria like thousands of other Syrians did every year. Economic migration was common. His cover story would be a business trip to Lebanon to purchase fabric. His family would travel separately days later under the pretense of medical appointments. If either leg failed, the other would abort. In June 1995, Faisal closed his shop and posted a handwritten note saying he would return in 1 week. He drove north toward the Lebanese border. Syrian border guards inspected his papers. They were genuine. He crossed without incident. 2 days later, his wife and children boarded a bus to Beirut. At a checkpoint, Syrian military police briefly examined documents. The family passed. No alarms, no chases, no suspicion. Once in Lebanon, Mossad teams moved quickly. Faisal and his family were transported separately to safe houses. High-quality forged European passports were issued. Within days, they boarded a commercial flight to Italy under new identities. Immigration officials processed them as ordinary travelers. Operation Needle was over. Faisal would never return to Damascus. His shop would remain closed. Neighbors would assume financial trouble. Syrian intelligence would never open a file. Inside Mossad, analysts quietly tallied the operation's impact. Multiple high-value identifications, several assassinations, numerous interdictions, all generated by a man who never fired a weapon. Operation Needle had proven something fundamental. The most dangerous intelligence platforms are not hidden bunkers or elite spy rings. They are ordinary places where people feel safe enough to forget they're being watched. After Faisal disappeared from Damascus, nothing visibly connected his shop unraveled. There were no arrests, no raids, no confessions broadcast on television. From the outside, Operation Needle ended the way it had existed for years. Quietly, but inside intelligence communities, its aftershocks continued to shape doctrine. Mossad analysts conducted a classified internal review examining how a single passive asset had generated more sustained value than dozens of short-lived active penetrations. The conclusion was uncomfortable for many traditional operatives. Aggressive espionage looked heroic, but patience produced better results. Faisal had never asked a single question. He had never stolen a document. He had never attended a meeting. Yet his quiet presence had enabled precise targeting across multiple countries. The operation forced a fundamental reassessment of what infiltration really meant. It was no longer about getting inside command rooms. It was about occupying the spaces people passed through before they ever reached those rooms. The idea of passive access nodes became central to Mossad training. Recruits were taught to look for environments that adversaries could not function without. Clinics, repair shops, transportation offices, bureaucratic counters, any place where routine overcame suspicion. Operation Needle became a case study taught in closed classrooms, stripped of names but heavy with implications. Western intelligence services quietly requested briefings. Some were stunned by how low-tech the core collection method had been. No satellites, no intercept towers, just film and patience. The success also triggered uncomfortable ethical debates. Within Mossad itself, younger officers questioned whether turning ordinary civilian services into intelligence platforms crossed a moral line that could never be uncrossed. Senior officers responded pragmatically. War had already erased clear boundaries. The enemy used civilian cover. Intelligence would inevitably respond in kind. The question was not whether such methods were moral, but whether they were effective. And Operation Needle was undeniably effective. Meanwhile, Palestinian counterintelligence did eventually notice a pattern. By the late 1990s, several senior figures had been assassinated abroad after being observed in civilian settings. No single source explained the leaks. No communications channel seemed compromised. Gradually, internal security guidance began to change. Commanders were advised to rotate service providers, avoid returning to the same doctor, the same barber, the same tailor. Silence in civilian spaces became mandatory. Guards were instructed not to wait outside shops. These measures increased paranoia and degraded trust inside organizations. Everyday life became heavier. Even weddings required layered security planning. From Mossad's perspective, the secondary effect was itself valuable. The more paranoid an organization becomes, the less efficiently it functions. Internal suspicion fractures cohesion. Leaders spend energy on internal vetting instead of external operations. Operation Needle had not only produced tactical successes, it had imposed long-term psychological cost on adversaries. For Abu Faisal, the aftermath was anticlimactic. He and his family settled in a small Italian city under new identities. Mossad provided initial financial support and assistance, establishing a legitimate business. Faisal opened another tailoring shop. Different country, different language, same profession. He did not speak publicly about his past. He did not contact former neighbors. He lived quietly. Psychological evaluations conducted during resettlement described him as emotionally blunted but functional. He slept poorly. He avoided news. He preferred routine. He continued tailoring. The work was familiar. It required no reflection. Mossad considered him retired, not celebrated. There were no medals, no public recognition. Intelligence culture rarely honors assets. Assets exist to be forgotten. From a strategic standpoint, Operation Needle permanently influenced Mossad's recruitment philosophy. Instead of prioritizing ideologically aligned volunteers, greater emphasis was placed on identifying individuals whose professional roles naturally intersected with sensitive populations. Loyalty became less important than predictability. Stability became more valuable than passion. The ideal asset was no longer the angry revolutionary or the political sympathizer. It was the bored clerk, the overworked technician, the quiet tradesman, people with routines, people who disliked attention, people who would not draw notice even if their lives depended on it. The operation also demonstrated the power of aggregation. No single photograph from Faisal's shop was decisive. No single measurement triggered an assassination. But thousands of small data points, accumulated over years, produce a level of certainty that traditional espionage rarely achieved. Intelligence became statistical rather than anecdotal. Probability replaced testimony. This model anticipated later data-driven intelligence practices that rely on pattern recognition rather than singular sources. At a deeper level, Operation Needle blurred the boundary between civilian life and intelligence battlefield. The tailor shop was not a military installation. It was not a government building. It was a civilian space. Yet it functioned as a long-term targeting platform. This reality unsettled even seasoned operatives. If intelligence services could weaponize tailoring, they could weaponize almost anything. Hospitals, schools, charities, markets. The implication was disturbing but logically unavoidable. Modern intelligence does not need secret bases everywhere. It needs access to normality. The operation also raises a question that remains unresolved. Was Abu Faisal a victim or a collaborator? He was coerced. His debt was fabricated. He was manipulated into cooperation. Yet he continued for 7 years. He did not attempt escape. He did not sabotage the operation. He followed procedures meticulously. Some argue that survival under coercion does not equal moral responsibility. Others argue that enabling lethal operations, even under pressure, constitutes complicity. Both interpretations coexist. Intelligence professionals tend to view Faisal as a successful asset. Human rights advocates would likely describe him as a civilian forced into participating in a killing apparatus. The truth is messier than either label. Operation Needle did not depend on hatred. It did not depend on ideology. It depended on routine, on habit, on the human tendency to lower defenses in familiar environments. That is what made it so powerful. And that is what makes it so unsettling. The most dangerous intelligence operation in Damascus was not run from a bunker or embassy. It was run from a changing room, behind a mirror. The men who died because of Operation Needle never knew the Tailor's name mattered. They never knew the mirror was not just a mirror. They never knew that trust itself had become the weapon. Years after Operation Needle ended, fragments of its existence began circulating quietly among intelligence professionals, not as public revelations, but as whispered references inside closed networks. No official histories were published. No documents were declassified. Yet the operational lessons seeped outward, shaping how multiple services around the world rethought human intelligence collection. The central idea was deceptively simple: access beats aggression. Rather than risking constant exposure through active spying, intelligence agencies began prioritizing long-term positioning inside mundane systems. Transportation clerks, building maintenance staff, telecom technicians, medical receptionists, people whose jobs placed them near sensitive individuals without raising suspicion. Operation Needle had proven that a single well-placed civilian could outperform entire covert networks if left undisturbed long enough. Mossad quietly expanded this philosophy into other theaters. Similar models were tested in North Africa, Eastern Europe, and parts of Asia. Most never reached the scale of Faisal's operation, but some produced meaningful results. The core principle remained unchanged. Do not rush. Do not overtask. Let routine do the work. Intelligence gathering became less about dramatic heroics and more about long-term statistical accumulation. This shift also changed how analysts were trained. Younger analysts were taught to look for patterns rather than stories, to trust correlations rather than confessions, to assume that adversaries would lie, but their habits would not. In this sense, Operation Needle anticipated the age of big data before big data became a common term. Meanwhile, Palestinian security organizations continued adapting, though always a step behind. Internal investigations never identified Faisal or his shop. There was no evidence to find. Instead, security doctrine hardened around behavior restrictions. Leaders were encouraged to minimize civilian interactions altogether. Some began using trusted internal tailors. Others switched to buying ready-made clothing and avoiding alterations entirely. But even these adaptations carried costs. Homemade solutions were less efficient. Quality declined. Morale suffered. Small inconveniences multiplied. Operational friction increased. From Mossad's perspective, these frictions were strategically valuable. They forced adversaries to divert energy inward. At the human level, Faisal's personal story faded into obscurity. Under his new identity in Italy, he lived a quiet life. He worked. He paid taxes. He raised his children. He never spoke about Syria. He never followed Middle Eastern news. He avoided conversations about politics. Psychologists who evaluated him during resettlement noted a persistent emotional numbing. Not trauma in the cinematic sense. No flashbacks. No breakdowns. Instead, a flattening. A narrowing of emotional range. He derived comfort from routine. The same comfort that had once made him useful to Mossad now helped him survive as civilian again. Mossad did not maintain ongoing contact with him. Assets are not meant to remain connected once retired. The fewer links that exist, the safer everyone becomes. Occasionally, his case officer wondered what he thought about the men who had died after standing in his shop. The truth was unknowable. Faisal had never asked who they were. He had never been told. That ignorance remained intact. From an ethical standpoint, Operation Needle continues to occupy a gray zone that intelligence professionals rarely discuss publicly. Coercion was used in recruitment. Deception was embedded in every layer of the operation. Civilian infrastructure was transformed into a lethal intelligence platform. These facts clash with conventional notions of distinction between combatants and non-combatants. Yet modern intelligence work rarely respects such distinctions. Adversaries hide among civilians. Intelligence services respond by embedding within civilian life. The cycle reinforces itself. Each side points to the other as justification. There is no neutral ground. Operation Needle simply demonstrated how far this logic could be pushed. It also revealed an uncomfortable truth about trust. Human societies function because most daily interactions are based on assumption, a benign intent. You trust the person cutting your hair. You trust a mechanic fixing your car. You trust a tailor measuring your body. If those assumptions collapse, normal life becomes impossible. Intelligence services exploit this precisely because it is so deeply rooted. Operation Needle did not invent this exploitation. It refined it. The success of the operation suggests that future intelligence conflicts will be fought less through spectacular acts and more through invisible accumulation, not explosions, but databases, not dramatic betrayals, but unnoticed observation. This trend raises profound questions for civilian life. If any ordinary service role can become an intelligence collection point, how does one distinguish safe space from contested space? The honest answer is that you cannot. That uncertainty is itself a form of power. It forces adversaries to assume compromise everywhere. It forces constant vigilance. Constant vigilance exhausts organizations. Exhausted organizations make mistakes. Mistakes create openings. Operation Needle did not end Palestinian militancy. It did not stop conflict. It did not produce decisive strategic victory, but it contributed to a slow erosion of operational confidence among certain networks. It also reshaped Mossad's internal identity. The agency began viewing itself less as a force of daring operatives and more as a machine of patient collectors. This self-image influenced recruitment, training, and promotion. Officers who excelled at long-term asset handling gained prestige. Flashy operations became less central to institutional mythology. Quiet success replaced dramatic storytelling. The legacy of Abu Faisal, if it can be called legacy, is therefore paradoxical. He remains unknown to the public. He holds no place in history books. Yet the model built around his existence continues to influence how intelligence agencies think about the world. A tailor in Damascus proved that the most powerful intelligence tools do not always look like weapons. Sometimes they look like tape measures. Sometimes they look like mirrors. And sometimes they look like ordinary men who survive by staying invisible. Operation Needle ultimately forces a question that extends far beyond Abu Faisal, beyond Mossad, and beyond any single conflict. What happens to society when intelligence work becomes indistinguishable from ordinary life? Traditional images of espionage rely on separation: spies versus civilians, battlefields versus homes, secrets versus normality. Operation Needle collapsed those boundaries. The battlefield became a fitting room. The censor became a mirror. The collector became a man who spent his life adjusting sleeves. This transformation did not occur because intelligence agencies suddenly became more ruthless. It occurred because modern conflict increasingly hides inside civilian space. When militant leaders live among families, travel through markets, and use ordinary businesses, intelligence services adapt by embedding within those same environments. The result is a world where the line between civilian and operational terrain erodes quietly rather than explosively. For intelligence professionals, this evolution feels logical. For civilians, it is deeply unsettling. It suggests that safety is not defined by location, but by invisibility, and invisibility itself can be weaponized. Abu Faisal's shop did not look dangerous. That was precisely why it was. The success of Operation Needle did not depend on technological superiority. It depended on understanding human behavior at its most basic level. People relax during routine. They lower their guard when engaging in familiar services. They speak more freely when they believe no one important is listening. Intelligence services have always exploited these tendencies, but rarely with such sustained patience. Operation Needle proved that patience itself could become a strategic asset. 7 years of quiet observation produced a depth of understanding that no short-term infiltration could match. It also revealed the hidden power of accumulation. One photograph means little. One measurement means nothing. But thousands of small data points, layered over time, create certainty. This model now dominates modern intelligence thinking. Big revelations matter less than consistent collection. Sudden breakthroughs matter less than slow convergence. From this perspective, Abu Faisal did not enable assassinations. He enabled certainty. And certainty is what allowed operational units to act with confidence. Whether that distinction offers moral comfort is another question entirely. Abu Faisal never chose targets. He never pulled a trigger. He never approved an operation. Yet men died because information passed through his hands. Some will argue that coercion absolves him. Others will argue that continued participation creates responsibility regardless of initial pressure. Both positions contain truth. The reality of intelligence work is that moral clarity rarely exists. Decisions are made under constraint, fear, and incomplete information. Abu Faisal's primary motivation appears to have been survival. He protected his family. He preserved his business for as long as he could. He endured a life he did not choose. In another context, he might have lived and died as a forgotten tailor in Damascus. Instead, he became a component inside a system far larger than himself. The men who visited his shop were not innocent bystanders. Many were actively involved in planning violence. But they were also human beings. They worried about their families. They prepared for weddings. They discussed everyday frustrations. They trusted a man who offered them professional service. That trust became their vulnerability. Operation Needle, therefore, exposes a painful paradox. Intelligence work aims to protect civilian populations by disrupting violent networks. Yet it does so by exploiting civilian trust. It protects some civilians by turning other civilian spaces into silent traps. This paradox has no clean resolution. It is embedded in the nature of modern asymmetric warfare. As long as armed groups operate from within civilian society, intelligence services will seek ways to penetrate that society invisibly. As long as intelligence services do that, civilians will remain potential collection points. The cycle feeds itself. Looking forward, the logic of Operation Needle suggests a future where intelligence collection becomes even more decentralized and normalized. Data will come not only from sensors and satellites, but from patterns of movement, purchasing behavior, service usage, and routine interactions. The tailor shop of the future may be a mobile phone repair kiosk, a ride-share vehicle, a clinic reception desk. The tools will change. The principle will not. Access plus time equals insight. For societies, this raises uncomfortable questions about privacy, neutrality, and the meaning of civilian status in conflict zones. For intelligence agencies, it reinforces a sobering lesson. The most effective operations may never be celebrated, never acknowledged, and never publicly understood. They will look like nothing. Abu Faisal's greatest operational achievement was remaining boring. No heroism, no drama, no visible action, just consistency. In that sense, Operation Needle represents a quiet revolution in espionage culture. It shifts admiration away from daring acts and toward invisible endurance. It suggests that the most dangerous people in modern intelligence wars may not look dangerous at all. They may look tired. They may look ordinary. They may look like men who spend their lives measuring fabric. In the end, Abu Faisal vanished into anonymity, carrying knowledge he never fully possessed and consequences he could never completely escape. The men who died because of Operation Needle are known only in fragments, names scattered across classified files and unconfirmed reports. The operation itself exists mainly as a lesson, not a story about a tailor, not a story about Mossad, but a story about how power now hides inside routine, how observation now hides inside service, and how trust itself has become contested ground. Whether that reality makes the world safer or simply more quietly dangerous depends largely on where you stand. But one truth remains. The mirror in Abu Faisal's shop was never just a mirror, and the man holding the tape measure was never just measuring cloth.